Josh Hasten here, Israel Uncensored, on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. It is Sunday, the 7th of October, 2018, the 28th day of Tishrei, 5779. Hope everyone out there had a wonderful Sukkot holiday. The holiday season is now behind us for Jews around the world and here in Israel. We haven't spoken in a very, very long time. We didn't speak during the holidays. And then right before the holidays started, we dedicated a show to Ari Fuld, Hashem Yokam Damo, a good friend of mine. So I did an intro, if you recall, and then we aired one of the recent shows we did with Ari as our guest. So we aired that in his memory. Very difficult. It's still very difficult. It still stings for all of us who knew Ari. And everyone here, especially in Gush Etzion, Israel, where Ari lived and did a lot of his work. So it's still, Ari is on our minds all the time here in Israel and especially in the Gush. So we haven't spoken, you and I, since before that show. The week before that is when we did our last live show. So it's been a while. Hope everyone is safe and everyone is doing well in your part of the world. Always get in touch with me during the week. Josh at thelandofisrael.com on Facebook. It's Joshua Hasten on Twitter at Josh Hasten. On today's show, we have a very special guest. I am here with Shai Ben-Tekoa. He also is a radio personality, currently does a weekly podcast for IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. They do an amazing job over there as well. He is formerly a longtime broadcaster on IsraelNationalRadio.com, so we have that in common as well. And he has a brand new hardcover book out. It's a two-volume book, 2 volumes, called Phantom Nation, Inventing the Palestinians as the Obstacle to Peace, published by Geffen Publishing House. And we'll tell you in a little bit how you can get a copy of this book, Phantom Nation. It's truly an honor. Shai Ben-Tekoa, welcome to Israel Uncensored here on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com.
Thank you. Good to see you, Josh.
Great to see you. Let's get right to it with the book. Phantom Nation, Inventing the, in quotes, Palestinians, as it says here on the cover, as the Obstacle to Peace, volumes 1 and 2. Tell me about the book.
The origin of this book was being hired by Yossi Ben Aaron, who was the head of staff, chief of staff for Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir. Zichrono Livracha. This was after the Scud War in 1991. I was hired to do a statistical analysis of voting patterns at the United Nations because the Bush-Baker administration was pushing for an international peace conference under UN auspices, and Prime Minister Shamir said, no way. They said, oh, you're just a paranoid Jew, don't worry, it'll be okay. No. And the work I did for them helped them deny their push, and it eventually went to Madrid under the auspices of the Russians. And what I did is I read every UN Social Security Council and General Assembly resolution from 1945 to 1989. That's 45 years inclusive. I read 870 UN resolutions. And doing the work, calculating, tabulating the different styles, and presented my stuff to them, which helped them resist Bush-Baker. At the same time, while I'm reading through these 870 for my own purposes, I'm looking for the first reference to the Palestinians. When did they become an issue? People take a guess. It's amazing. Not until 1970. This is 25 years the UN was debating the Arab-Israeli conflict, as it was called, until the Six-Day War. And only 3 years after the Six-Day War, you have one resolution with a reference to the people of Palestine. The following year, it was the Palestinian people, and the rest is history. They were invented after the Six-Day War in order to fight Resolution 242. Resolution 242 called for peace talks between the combatant states. Said nothing about any Palestinians. Not only that, as opposed to the lies that people spread, it said nothing about Palestinian refugees. There's a clause there about helping the refugees. But the facts of the matter are that after 1949, the bulk of the refugees were Jews, driven out of the Arab countries. There were more of them than there were of the Arabs. So I found that particular first resolution, and the rest is history. This is when they become the centerpiece. The bulk, the plurality of the work and the resolutions at the United Nations to this day are Israel-bashing resolutions. This is what they do at the UN. This is where they make their money. These people, they vote on these resolutions. So what I did is I continued my research, and I wrote this book after voluminous research. And this is what it is. It shows what's called semantic infiltration. For example, there's no reference to Yasser Arafat till 1968, even though he established the Fatah in 1959. He was a nobody until then. Everything happens after the Six-Day War. Until then, Judea and Samaria, as we know, were in the hands of the Jordanians, the two kings, Abdullah and his grandson Talal. Neither of them said that the Arabs west of the river were another nation deserving of a state. These guys are direct descendants of Muhammad. That's their charisma and their power. Only afterwards, when we take over Judea and Samaria and the holy city of Jerusalem, the world all of a sudden discovers this ancient nation that's been here since the beginning of time, and we stole Palestine from the Palestinians. That's when it begins.
So I want to cut you off there if I can, just to clarify for the listeners out there. Before 1948, before Israel won a defensive war and established a state here in the land of Israel, returning to our roots, you had the Palestinian national soccer team. That was a group of Jewish soccer players. Yes. You had the Palestine Post. That was a Jewish newspaper here in British-mandated Palestine here, which became the State of Israel. So then you have, as you mentioned, 1968, 1970, all of a sudden the UN starts referring to a Palestinian people, a nation, a land, all this other stuff, and everyone runs with it. I want you to explain how they were able, and I'm sure this is what you deal with a lot in the book, but how were Yasser Arafat and all his cronies and all the other terrorists and those who came before him in the Fatah, who established this nation, so to speak, how were they able to pull this off? How were they able to create something out of nothing? And the lexicon that we use until today, whether you're talking about the word Palestinian or the word occupation or the word settlement, all these other propaganda terms which have been used now for years and years, for over 50 years, how'd they pull this off? You know, people always say Israel has a PR issue. We always have a problem. We're not good at explaining ourselves. Well, these people must be masters in this PR battle, because they succeeded in creating something out of nothing. Explain how this was possible.
There are several factors at work in your question. First of all, a major influence on the Arab-Israeli conflict, as it was called. Today they call it the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is most significant because now you're reversing the polarity. When it's the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Arabs are the big guys in the first position, and Israel's the little underdog. We were David in 1967 who brought down the Arab Goliath. Since then, it's been the Israelis who are the superpower of the Middle East. What influenced this whole process was the war in Algeria. Algeria was occupied for 132 years by the French because this was the worst of the so-called Barbary pirates, who were not pirates. They were just jihadis. They were Muslims whose business was hijacking, hostage-taking, and enslaving. And the French put a stop to that by invading Algiers and creating the country of Algeria. And when the rebels in Algeria after World War II got kicking, what they did is they understood, they were smart enough to understand that you can't talk religion to Europeans. You have to speak the language of national liberation. So they, among themselves, referred to themselves as Mujahideen. To this day, the official newspaper in Algeria is El Mujahid, but when they spoke French to the French and the Europeans and they wanted their support, they called themselves National Liberation Freedom Fighters. It was on that model that the Fatah was created in 1959, 10 years afterwards. And then the PLO was created, Palestine Liberation Organization. It was this imitation which got them on the right track to how to speak to the West, number one. Number two, to answer the other part of your question, and this is where it's most serious, the help the Arabs got from Jews, the left in Israel, the left in the diaspora. They were desperate to have another nation to work against. Why? This is going to astonish some people. For the first 40 years after the League of Nations mandate that kicked in 1922, Haji Amin al-Husseini was their leader. He was violently opposed to the very idea of Palestine. For 40 years, the official Arab line was, there's no such country as Palestine. It's only after the Six-Day War that this really kicks in. And what he was pushing was the religion line, which is all they had because there are no Palestinians in history. They have no Palestinian anything in the past. It was the Israelis. Tzipi Livni talks this way to this day. Yossi Beilin talks this way to this day. Their big idea was, if we define this conflict as a religious conflict between Jews and Muslims, there's no hope. You can't change the person's religion. So let's call it a political conflict. We're the ancient Israeli Jewish people here in our ancient beloved homeland, and they're the ancient Palestinians, and they have a right to have a state too. What drove them crazy all these years was our occupation. Ron Pundak, the late Ron Pundak, was one of the architects of the Oslo abomination, as I call it. He said what really motivated us was not so much a belief we're going to get peace this way, but we wanted to stop the religious Jews from creating settlements, because they did not see Israel as a Jewish state, a state of Jews or people of Jewish extraction, meaning we don't want religion. And you people are settling in Judea and Samaria, and we don't want you religious people to live in Judea and Samaria because we don't want a Jewish state. And so we'll call it the West Bank, which, by the way, is proof that there never was a Palestinian people. They never had a name for these hills. They call themselves the indigenous people here, but every indigenous people gives names to its mountains and its rivers and its lakes. They never had a name for it. So they started calling it West Bank. To this day, the Jerusalem Post and other leftist publications call it West Bank. They're effacing the names Judea and Samaria, which have been on maps for thousands of years until 1970. This is what they want. They want to have a parallel national liberation movement for the Palestinians, as Tzipi Livni says, and Beilin. Then we can have some kind of compromise. When it's a political fight and not a religious fight, we can work out some nice kind of compromise. So it comes from the left, and it comes from outside sources as well.
And as you pointed out, the PLO, founded in 1964, 3 years before the Six-Day War, and there were any so-called settlements, which I call communities in Judea and Samaria. But those who have this impression that if only Israel would abandon its so-called settlement enterprise, communities in Judea and Samaria, we would have peace. An organization dedicated towards towards destroying the state of Israel came into being 3 years beforehand. So if you had any confusion what their real goals were, just take a look at your history, as Shai just pointed out, in terms of when that organization was established, what their charter is, till this day, the destruction of the state of Israel. Now, with the fact that all of these news organizations and Israeli politicians till today still use the terms that you're talking about, the term Palestinian, the term West Bank, as you said, is there any way to go back? Yes. Go back and change the vocabulary which is being misused all this time?
You hit the nail on the head. The thing that Israel has to do is to stop calling these people Palestinians. Does that sound crazy? Yes, and it was crazy in 1897 when Herzl said, let's have a state, and people thought he was nuts. It can be done. It has to be done because there's nothing Palestinian about these people. If you stop and think about it, there's nothing Palestinian about the people called Palestinians. They don't speak the indigenous language of Palestine, which is Hebrew. Their indigenous language, native language, is Arabic, and the provenance, which is a technical term, is in the Arabian Peninsula. There's no Palestinian religion or religious sect. There's no Palestinian book that speaks of the history of this allegedly ancient people in any language in any library on the planet. It's a verbal construct. That's all it is. That's what we have to do. And while we're at it, since we had a miserable day on Friday again in Gaza, we have to stop calling the Gaza Strip the Gaza Strip. This, too, is a geography that's never existed in history. It's the remnant of the invasion of the Egyptian army in 1949. As people call this, dishonestly, the occupied Palestinian territories, we should start calling Gaza the occupied Israeli territories. According to the League of Nations, this is our legitimate land, the Gaza Strip, as much as Judea and Samaria. And what I would suggest is the way to win down there is not to invade. I think that's crazy to think we can invade. What we can do is siege warfare. We tell them in 3, 4, 5 years, we're going to turn off the lights. The Gaza Strip exists because Israel keeps it alive. This is the craziness. We are the craziest people on the planet. They fire rockets into our homes, and we supply them with electricity to make the rockets. Who ever heard of such a thing in the history of the human race?
We're actually going to discuss what's going on down in Gaza in just a few minutes on the second part of the show, in addition to another horrible terror attack today, Sunday, in the Barkan industrial zone. We'll get to that in just a few minutes. But, you mentioned now turning off the electricity in a few years. I would say a few days. I mean, we have the bodies, unfortunately, of our 2 IDF soldiers were being held by Hamas. You have 2 Israelis One actually is an Arab being held by Hamas, another an Israeli family from originally from Ethiopia, both with a history of mental illness, who are presumed alive, being held now by the Hamas in Gaza. I mean, this strategy I've done a little homework. I've seen this strategy used before. I think the UN, there was a conflict, something going on in Somalia. I don't know if it was Mogadishu, another country, where the UN actually was looking for a terrorist. I don't know if you ever heard this story. Was looking for a terrorist, and they decided to shut off all the electricity in a neighborhood, and then eventually the people there said, we can't take this anymore, and they turned over the terrorist. I mean, I think it could be just a much shorter period, in my opinion, if Israel says to Hamas, we're going to shut off the electricity. That's it. It's done. You give back the bodies of our soldiers. You return the 2 live citizens, civilians, and you stop with the Friday terrorism and infiltrations on our Gaza border. I would give them a lot less time than a couple of years. What do you think? Is that possible?
I don't think it's feasible, and I also would find it a bit inhumane. We're humane people, and we have to be humane. There are 1.5 million plus Arabs there. They don't belong there. 70% of the people in Gaza are on the UNRWA dole. We're getting rid of the UNRWA dole. Thank you, President Trump. Thank you, Bolton, and all the guys in Washington. But these are human beings, and what we have to do is to have them evacuated. And maybe Angela Merkel wants some more Muslim Arabs. Bavakasha. They can go there. They can go to Sweden. They can go all these places. It would take time. Number 2, as I understand it, is that our electrical grid and water system, they're linked, because we were there for some years, and it would take time to redo the infrastructure. If we shut off the stuff tomorrow, there's going to be a howl from the whole planet. We have to be smart. I would say, give us time to redo the infrastructure, give them a date certain, and tell them in 3-4 years, however long it takes, that's when we're shutting off the water. But the biggest problem in this, as I say, more than the electricity, no less the electricity and the water, is it's big business, and it's the corruption of the Israeli people. Hundreds of semi-trailers go into the Gaza Strip every day, and you will have a howl from the guys who are supplying all of this stuff and making all this money, keeping them alive. I say start with the big picture. The big picture is this is insanity, and it's immoral, and it's Jews being anti-Semitic. What are we doing supplying them with anything when they're firing rockets into our houses?
I've made that point myself on Twitter, tagging Kogat. As I do so, asking Kogat, why are you so proud that you're sending all this equipment in? We know that Hamas diverts the equipment or the humanitarian aid that's supposed to go to the people. They take it for themselves. They use all the building materials for their tunnels. They use all the other materials which they can get their hands on for the rockets. This is just enabling. This is actually making the conditions of the people there worse, because we're enabling Hamas, who rule over their lives. So I agree with you totally that this is just prolonging and enabling the people. I don't think we should be proud of supplying them with all this aid when really it's just ending up hurting them. I say make conditions. You say it'll take a long time. I say make conditions, unfortunately, worse for the people to realize that this is not because of Israel, that this is, as they've been taught since birth, this is because of the Hamas and the other terror organizations there. They're the ones responsible. They're the ones causing it. And I think eventually the people will need to realize that and wake up and somehow, as you said, leave. I say at least begin with overthrowing those in charge.
Except that this is Arab society, and the average guy doesn't count. And if we do all kinds of sanctions against them, the average guy who has no power over these thugs, he's going to suffer. And it's towards no. We're on the same page. We've got to get rid of the Gaza Strip. The question is how. And by the way, that's another thing we have to get rid of: Hamas. This is the Muslim Brotherhood. Mm-hmm. These are the same people who brought down the World Trade Center. We have to make that as long as we play the game of the Palestinian people who have been here for thousands of years, whose country was stolen from them by us, as long as we play the game with these words and this vocabulary, we're lost. Go back to your original observation. Why do we have such lousy PR? The moment you accept the idea of a Palestinian people, you cannot have any PR. You are admitting the fact that this is their land. Every time a Jew or anybody talks about the Palestinians, you're giving them title deed to Palestine. We can't call them Palestinians. We shouldn't call them Hamas. This is the Muslim Brotherhood. This is back to the days of Hajj Amin. This is a jihad. It's camouflage, and it's a smokescreen that this is a Palestinian national movement for liberation. This is all baloney.
You're listening to Shai Ben-Tekoa, author of Phantom Nation, Inventing the Palestinians as the Obstacle to Peace. It just was published by Geffen Publishing House. Shai, we're nearly out of time here, but what is the best way to get a copy of this very, very important book which I see you've put a tremendous amount of time and effort into getting this out so people can see the facts, which they are sorely, unfortunately, a lot of people are sorely lacking. What's the best way to get the book and to get in touch with you if they want to learn more?
Amazon. Go to Amazon. You'll find Phantom Nation on the Amazon page. Since it's new, there's one review for the hardcover, but there are softcover versions which preceded this, and there's dozens of 5-star reviews, so you can read the reviews there. There's also a Kindle, which is much cheaper. The hardcover it's 1,000 pages. It's more expensive. If you've got an app for your Kindle, then it's like $10. So that's the way to go for it. Go to Amazon, or if you are in the States and you don't have Amazon, you don't want to put on it online, go to your bookstore and ask for an order from the bookseller. They can get it now. It's available in hardcover.
If people want to email you, get in touch with you, hear more about your thoughts, your ideas, your philosophies, how can people reach you?
You can reach me on my email, which is SBT, Samuel Baker Thomas, Shai Ben-Tekoa, SBT at deprogramprogram.com. That's one word. D as in David, E as in Edward, program, deprogramprogram.com.
Well, it's truly an honor to have you on the show. Shai Ben-Tekoa, former colleague at the old station, or the old station, or whatever you want to call it now. Those who've been listening to my shows for years know I've been moving around in terms of the world of radio and podcasts, but it was an honor to overlap with Shai back then, and it's great to be in touch with him now. Get yourself a copy today. Phantom Nation, Inventing the Palestinians as the Obstacle to Peace. We are going to take a short break and unfortunately come back with some more bad news. Hopefully we'll find some good news in today's in Israel today. I'm sure we can. There's always good things going on here. Unfortunately, we're going to talk about a terror attack as the details are coming in here on Sunday. Very, very tragic, very sad. We'll get to that in just a few minutes. My name is Josh Hasten. Get in touch with me during the week. Josh at thelandofisrael.com. On Facebook, it's Joshua Hasten, and on Twitter at Josh Hasten. Short break, and we'll be right back.
The question is, why are the Jews there in the first place? The Jewish people have been yearning to return to their ancient homeland for a long time.
The Yishai Fleischer Show, the voice of a new generation of pro-Israel activists.
And there's only two kinds of minorities in the Middle East, armed or unarmed.
Inspiring minds to think differently.
That jihadism doesn't just attack Jews. It attacks Christians, and it mostly attacks Muslims.
Inspiration, spirituality, and politics.
So first and foremost, this country is here to defend Jewish people and to live in its ancestral homeland.
Listen to the Yishai Fleischer Show every week on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com.
And we are back. Josh Hasten, Israel Uncensored on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. It is Sunday, the 7th of October, 2018, the 28th day of Tishrei 5779. Thanks again to Shai Ben-Tekoa for that interview. Now, unfortunately, another horrible, horrible story, which I have to share with you right now. And by the time you hear this, I'm sure that more details will have had emerged. But this morning, another jihadist terror attack here in Israel, this one at the Barkan Industrial Zone in Samaria, in the Shomron near Ariel. The IDF currently searching for an armed Arab terrorist who brutally murdered 2 Israelis in the Barkan Industrial Zone, known as this oasis of coexistence with Jews and Arabs working together. And I think that certainly puts the situation into question right now as an employee of one of the companies there in the Barkan Industrial Zone, using his access to his workplace, place of work, and brutally, and the reports indicate that he was armed with a submachine gun, tied up 2 of his victims before executing them. 2 Israelis are dead as a result of this horrendous terror attack. The first victim has been identified, 28-year-old Kim Levingrad Yecheskel from Rosh Ayin. Apparently she has a small child, leaves a small child without a mother. Just a horrible attack. A third person also was wounded. The identity at this point of the second victim has not been released. By the time you are listening to this, you will probably know the identity of the man, the Israeli man who was murdered in cold blood, execution style, by this savage beast, this jihadist who murdered another two Israelis gone today. This morning, reports started coming in early in the morning. They weren't sure what happened. They heard about a shooting. They thought maybe, possibly a disgruntled employee, something like that. But indications are also based on this monster's social media that he had intended to, quote, that he was waiting for Allah. That's what he said on his Facebook page. This terrorist, the 23-year-old from Kalkilia, which is an Arab town also nearby. So just horrible, horrible news this morning here from Israel on Sunday morning. And another two gone. Another two lost. I mean, I don't know what it will take. I don't know how many. I can't even keep track how many times over the years I've had to report or comment on terror attacks in Israel. Nearly nonstop, unfortunately. And there's so much good here in this country. And I would never dissuade anybody from moving here, from visiting Israel. But the leadership must crack down. Don't give me this nonsense about destroying a house in a few months from now, the terrorist house. Serious deterrence, a serious change in attitude and in policy is what is needed once and for all. I say it ad nauseum. A broken record I am, repeating it over and over. How many good people are we going to lose? How many of our brothers and sisters are we going to lose? God forbid. But it keeps on happening. So anyway, that's the report from the Barkan Industrial Zone. This oasis, right? Oasis of peace. You know, I talk about coexistence at the Gush Etzion Junction, and you have Barkan, and you have these other areas. Okay, you can say a few are ruining it for the many. You can argue that perhaps. I don't know anymore. I don't. But this so-called coexistence is killing us, literally, unfortunately. So I don't know how much of a coexistence actually exists when things like this happen. At the same time, we turn to Gaza, where the 28th week of violent protests took place on Friday. Hamas-led, I wouldn't even call them demonstrations, acts of terror, attempted infiltrations, hurling of grenades against IDF soldiers, promises of infiltrating Israel and murdering the civilians, citizens of the state of Israel. That happened again this past Friday. And there was also a huge fire on Saturday here. I'll give you the details in a second from the Jerusalem Post. But this is our response, reported in the J-Post. Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman ordered the Gaza fishing zone to be reduced to 6 nautical miles from 9 on Saturday following violent protests along the security fence with Israel. So that's the big punishment, 3 nautical miles of fishing. That's what we do? That's a deterrent for terror? I don't accept that. I'm sorry. The defense minister is quoted here, has instructed that preparations be made for additional measures if the violence continues. A lot of words, folks. I'm sad to say it, and I hate to do it, but there are a lot of words and a lot of rhetoric, a lot of tough talk. Let's see some action down there in Gaza and in Judea and Samaria when it comes to fighting terror. Now, I know we fight terror, okay? A lot of it doesn't get reported. And I posted on my Facebook the other day the fact that a Hamas cell was busted, and the government and the security forces should get credit where credit is due. But it does not seem like it's enough with these individual attacks being carried out in Judea and Samaria, the riots on the Gaza border, everything going on. Does not seem like we have a plan to stop this jihadism. According to the article here in the J-Post on Friday, 20,000 protesters took part in these violent demonstrations, throwing explosive devices, grenades, stones at troops, burning tires. Late Saturday night, firefighters were attempting to put out a huge blaze in the area of one of the kibbutzim down near the Gaza border. Apparently, this was one of the largest fires over the last 6 months. A report by Yediot Achronot said that there have been 2,000 fires in the south over the past 6 months, with these flaming kites and balloons, ravaging more than 2,800 dunam. So thousands of dunam or acres lost in these fires. Hamas incitement continues. People are being murdered in Judea and Samaria. I mean, what's the story, folks? What are we going to do to show that we are the power here? We are the stronger party here. We can flex our muscle and we can put an end to this, daily terrorism, weekly, monthly, yearly, year after year. The stuff been going on. Well, in truth, it's been going on for 100 years, but it's certainly picked up since Oslo, and then the so-called Oslo War, Second Intifada, Oslo War, and then the current, if it hasn't even subsided, stabbing war / Gaza terror balloon war, whatever you want to call these groupings or upswings in terror. It's not over. It's not over, and there's no end in sight. But we can do our best, as my friend Mark Provisor from the One Israel Fund says, to make sure there are no more Jewish victims. There are things we can do. First of all, as civilians, like One Israel and other organizations, Gush Etzion Foundation, which I'm affiliated with, you can donate and help provide for anti-terror systems. That's number one. But the bigger picture is it has to come from our government on a bigger level to stop these individual attacks, to stop Hamas once and for all, send Hamas packing, send the Palestinian Authority packing once and for all. That's why pencils have erasers, people. Let's use them. Let's use them, and no more Jewish victims. It all comes down to that. If you missed any part of the show, you can always listen to it on SoundCloud, iTunes, thelandofisrael.com, my Facebook page, the Land of Israel's Facebook page. So many different ways to hear the show and all the amazing shows here on the Land of Israel Network. Sorry, there isn't any good news that I have to share. Okay, we are back from Sukkot break, but we're right back where we left off with jihadism, with these jihadist attacks against the people in the land of Israel, against the Jews here. Enough is enough. A broken record. I say it over and over. Let's finally, to our leaders, let's finally deal with our unfortunate reality all over Judea, Samaria, Gaza border, the north, south, east, west, the entire country. We're all one. It has to stop, folks. Get in touch with me during the week, Josh at thelandofisrael.com, on Facebook, Joshua Hasten, on Twitter at Josh Hasten. Thanks to Benjamin Bresky and to Tabitha Epstein for all the work they do in getting these shows up. Let's hope for better news next week, folks. Let's hope things are a little quieter, and let's deal with our problems instead of putting Band-Aids on them long term. I'm Josh Hasten. Most importantly, be safe wherever you are in the wonderful world of ours. And we'll talk again next week. Shalom, shalom from Gush Etzion, Israel.
Torah thoughts and inspiration from the heartland of Israel. Tune in every week to The Soul of Israel with Rabbi Shlomo Katz on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com.